Eleanor Roosevelt said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." And in today's world, the path to grad school can help fulfill a whole host of dreams for your future. And Kaplan can help guide you on that path. Now, it can seem a bit daunting to think about all the steps that you have to take on your journey. So let's break it down into some bite-sized chunks and give you some important information so you can choose your path wisely. So first question is, why go to grad school in the first place? You've already been through so many years of school. Isn't it just time to say, no more pencils, no more books, no more teachers, dirty looks, and just be done with it already? Well, let's get into some hard data that will show you that now more than ever, a graduate degree has become a crucial distinction in the workplace. And investing in your future now, like any good investment, will help you reap the rewards for decades and decades to come. We live now in what you've probably heard called the information age, but the consequence of this is that we also live in the specialization age. Becoming a specialist in a field that is in high demand brings with it stability, flexibility, marketability, and certainly greater earning ability. The price tag on these benefits may seem a little overwhelming, but when you do the cost-benefit analysis, the benefits far outweigh the costs, including the probability of steady employment being far greater with a graduate degree. The term graduate degree is a broad one which includes both master's and PhD or doctorate degrees, though of course both will hold great value. Be very future-oriented and think long-term when making your decision about a school and a program. What do you think you'll want to be doing 10 years, 15, 20 years, or even 30 years from now? Once upon a time in a now bygone era, a high school degree was sufficient. Then for a period, an undergrad degree was considered sufficient to basically write your own ticket. But as you know, that's not the realistic state of affairs anymore. As globalization and other factors have increased competition, there's been this sort of arms race that has rewarded those with advanced degrees, and this trend shows no sign of subsiding any time moving forward. The good news, though, is that because this increased demand for graduate degrees has been taking place, schools have opened up more slots, so the acceptance rate has started to inch higher too. And underrepresented minorities have seen their presence increase in grad programs as well. Let's take a look at the data on which fields have been most desirable for applicants. While graduate degrees can be pursued in so many different fields, you'll notice here it's business, education, and health sciences that collectively comprise over 50% of advanced degrees. Now, we mentioned earlier that you should think about what you want to be doing 10, 15, 20, or even 30 years from now. But you should also do your research on the future of a particular field. For example, as the population ages and research on disease and treatment expands, the need for experts in health sciences is expected to skyrocket in the coming years. And obviously, you want your investment in your future to pay off as much as possible. Forbes magazine did an extensive study and found these to be the top 10 fields over the next decade in terms of employment and salary. All right, now take a few moments here to recoil at the horror at the sticker shock of the average graduate school debt. All right, now take a deep breath, because those are the averages, and it doesn't mean that you personally need to incur anywhere close to that kind of debt. There are a ton of merit-based scholarships available, including, yes, those that come with high GRE scores, which we'll get into shortly. Plus, schools want to attract high-quality applicants, so there are a variety of grants and other ways to secure funding. But this is where you've got to do your due diligence and plan ahead. As the expression goes, proper planning prevents poor performance. So, you know the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? The tortoise won the race by being slow and steady and deliberate, and the hare lost the race by doing things in fits and starts. Throughout your grad school education, but also throughout your GRE preparation and your application preparation, you want to be the tortoise. Hashtag be the tortoise. With so many schools and so many programs, it will realistically take a few months to winnow the field and select a handful of schools that you think will be a good fit for you. Factors to consider will include specialty, of course, geographic location, cost, certainly, but also if you're preparing for your GRE during that time and see your scores climb, it will open up a lot more doors for you at more schools, which will then put you more in control of your future. Then, after you have your whole applications packaged together, your GRE scores, your undergrad transcripts, recommendations, application essays, etc., making your applications as flawless as possible, you then get your applications into grad schools and await their decision. For any program that offers an interview as an option, seize that opportunity, as it's another chance for you to differentiate yourself from all your competition. Remember, you shouldn't just be considering why a school is a good choice for you, but you're trying to convince the school what you can bring to the table to make them want to admit you. And if you're applying to a school with rolling admissions, a good rule of thumb is that it's good to apply earlier rather than later. That's because as slots start to fill up deeper and deeper into the cycle, schools start to get much more selective. Okay, so how can Kaplan help you out here? Well, being the worldwide leader in test preparation means we know a thing or two about the GRE, which most grad programs not only require, but also consider a major factor in their decision. Now, scores are good for 5 years, so even if you're not going to apply right away, it's always good to have a very solid score in the bank. Plus, getting your strong GRE score out of the way earlier helps determine which schools you'd be a strong candidate for, and you can then dedicate your efforts to working on the other ingredients of your application. Plus, you can then get more targeted with which schools you're aiming for, especially since each application has a fee. And speaking of fees, taking the GRE multiple times, it's not the worst thing in the world, but every time you take it, it costs over $200, or bones, or clams, or whatever you wish to call them. A little Big Lebowski reference there. So ideally, you want to prep for the GRE over a fairly short period of time. It's an intensive period of time, but a fairly short period of time. For most students, about 1 to 3 months total. Then you go rock the GRE the first time you take it, go do a little happy dance, and after a suitable period of celebration, you then go work on the other ingredients of your application. Now you see here that the GRE is offered at designated test centers, most of which are run by a company called Prometric. But there's been a recent development in the logistics here. With the coronavirus outbreak, GRE has now offered the option that you can take the GRE in the comfort and, maybe more importantly, safety of your home. Actually, we were all pretty impressed at Kaplan with how quickly ETS, that's Educational Testing Services, the company that makes the GRE, with how quickly ETS was able to make this happen. And if you go to that link here, you'll see the tech requirements and the logistics of this, which include, a live proctor watching you take the test. Now, even with this change in delivery method of the GRE, the format, content, and nature of the test hasn't changed at all. It is, after all, a standardized test. Now, I know a lot of students hear that word standardized. A lot of students get all wee-weed up and say, I don't like standardized tests. Well, it's actually a very good thing for all of us that this test is standardized, because that means it's a predictable test filled with recurring patterns. The same kinds of questions will show up over and over again. The same kinds of strategies will get rewarded over and over again. The same kinds of mistakes will get penalized over and over again. Your mission is to get to know the ins and outs of this test, like an athlete gets to know their opponent before game day so you can perform better against them. In this case, your opponent would be the GRE. Now, the test is going to begin with two 30-minute essays. So on top of everything else, the GRE is an endurance test. You're writing essays for an hour, a full hour, before you see a single quant or verbal question. One essay is called the issue essay. That's basically a persuasive piece. You're given a topic and you explain that you understand what both sides are, and then you take a strong stance explaining why one side is right and the other side is wrong. The other essay is called the argument essay, and in that one, you break down a pre-existing argument into its components, conclusion, evidence, and assumptions, explaining to the arguer that the evidence provided isn't enough to prove the conclusion. You play the role of an editor, explaining how, well, we need more information so that the conclusion could be more persuasive. Then, after the essays, you're going to see in any order 2 scored quant sections, 2 scored verbal sections, and also an experimental section that could be either quant or verbal. Now, the 2 quant sections will each consist of about 20 questions and have 35 minutes apiece. Each quant section starts with a set of about 7 to 8 quantitative comparisons. You have to compare 2 quantities, followed by a set of problem-solving questions. They give you a problem, you solve it, hence the name problem solving, and then a set of questions that have some graphic content with graphs or charts or tables, and you need to interpret data. Note that within any given section, you can skip around within a section. You can't leave a section, go to a different one, and then come back to that section. But within any given section, you can certainly skip around. Ultimately, your score will be a reflection of 3 things: content knowledge, strategy execution, and certainly time management as well. Each of the 2 scored verbal sections will consist of about 20 questions, this time 30 minutes per section. So in quant, you have a little bit more time per section, which I think makes sense. I think you need a little bit more time in a quant section. In verbal, about half of the questions will be what we call short verbal, text completion, or sentence equivalence, where you're given a sentence or multiple sentences, and you have to fill in the blank with a certain word, or in the case of sentence equivalence, words. This is where vocabulary knowledge is of the utmost importance, which also includes knowing common word roots. And then about half of each verbal section will consist of reading comprehension questions, where you're given a passage and have to answer questions about said passage. Keep in mind, that part should be treated like an open book test. Nobody will take those passages away from you. They will stay there for as long as there are questions that pertain to them, so you needn't feel like you should try to absorb, understand, and digest every single detail. There are always way more details than they could possibly ever ask you about in the questions. Also, there'll be a 10-minute break following the 3rd section and a 1-minute break in between the other sections. So we're talking about a full 4 hours when you include the essays and the unscored quant or verbal section. And if you've never heard of an MST, or multi-stage test, well, this is one of the things that makes the actual GRE, and by the way, all of Kaplan's practice tests too, a little bit of a different animal than other standardized tests that you have taken in the past. For each of quant and verbal, there are 2 scored sections. I'll discuss how the dynamic of a multi-stage test works here with quant, but the same thing would apply to verbal. The first scored quant section will consist of mostly, not all, but mostly middle-of-the-road level questions. How you perform on that first scored quant section is going to dictate what you're going to see for your second scored quant section. So if you perform very well in section 1, your second scored quant section will be what's called section 2A and consist of mostly, not all, but mostly higher difficulty problems. If you do very poorly in section 1, your second section will be 2C, mostly low difficulty problems, and if you do so-so, then your second section is 2B, more medium difficulty problems. And no, they don't tell you whether you're in section 2A or 2B or 2C. But if you want to get a high score, which you do want to do, you do want to get into section 2A, because that is where the floor and the ceiling for your potential score goes up dramatically. If you get to that second scored quant section or second scored verbal section, and you start seeing a lot of really hard problems, it's not time to panic. It means you're doing well. It's time to step up your game and certainly make good timing decisions within the section. You see, your score comes not only from the number of questions you get right, your score comes from the number of questions you get right and the difficulty level of the questions that you got to see. And speaking of scores, the scores for the quant and verbal sections of the GRE range from 130 to 170 in increments of 1. The essays, well, they would be a completely separate score that go from 0 to 6 in increments of 0.5. The GRE places you in the appropriate place based on your performance on the bell curve, with the median score, where you're doing better than half of the test-taking population. The median score for quant being slightly higher than the median score for verbal. You'll also note here the scores that you would need to be in the 90th percentile for each of quant and verbal. That's where you would want to be for the top programs that are out there. But why do you even need to prepare for the GRE? If you were always a good student, couldn't you just kind of walk in there and wing it and expect to do well? No, not quite. Now, there are certainly some mathy rules that maybe if you haven't used in a while, you'll certainly want to brush off some cobwebs with, but as Gandhi said, the future depends on what you do starting today. Vocab building is absolutely crucial, and that takes some time. There are also certain strategies in quant and verbal, and yes, even the essays, that are really quite unique to the GRE. And those kinds of strategies can really help beef up your score and make you stand out compared to your competition. And standing out compared to your competition is incredibly important when it comes to the GRE because it's a critical admissions factor. We've done research with admissions officers at various schools and found out that a low GRE score is the #1 biggest application killer, followed by low undergraduate GPA. But the other thing to take from this pie chart is something else that's important. A low undergraduate GPA is probably not something you can do very much about in the short term the way that you can with a low GRE score. If you're already thinking about grad school, chances are you're either done with undergrad or almost done with undergrad, and so your GPA probably isn't going to move all that much. But the GRE score is something that you can do a lot about. And sometimes students forget, becoming a GRE champion isn't just about getting into the schools that you want to get into, but can help you get some money towards those schools as well. And you saw earlier that grad school isn't cheap. About 2/3 of grad school admissions officers report that a strong GRE score helps you get merit-based scholarships, teaching assistantships, or grants, and every little bit helps. And speaking of every little bit helps, the same is true when you climb up the percentile curve. Scaled scores, that would be the 130 to 170 that we saw earlier. They're very tightly clustered on the GRE. So every little incremental improvement already helps you leapfrog hundreds of thousands of candidates. And incremental improvement here and there, day by day, week by week, can really add up to great big gains in the long run. Say you go from a 156 to a 162 in quant, 6 points, or 163 to a 158 in verbal, 5 points, already boosts you 20 percentile points over 1/5 of other test takers. So take this test seriously. Take the application process seriously and give it the attention that it deserves, and let Kaplan be your Sherpas to get you to the top of that mountain. As Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict your future is to create it.